started with our presentation. So I'm Julie Trich. You see Transformative Leadership. That's my business partner, Emily Adams. As we've already discussed, we worked for a very major automotive company. That's where inspiration for what we do today came about. So one thing that we know that automotive manufacturing and manufacturing does really, really well is process, right? Process, strategy, business, process improvement, efficiency, love all of those things. To be completely frank, one thing that they do really shitty is leadership. So the way, and for a long time, I wasn't sure if this was a cultural thing or if it was just, no offense to French, right? But we're very different people. Um, and I wasn't sure if this was a cultural thing. And the more, we worked with people from all over the globe in different countries. I don't think it's just a cultural thing. I think it's more of a paradigm thing. And the way that as a globe and as a culture, we've been taught and we've all learned is it's not always beat them into the ground, but a lot of times it is. And so as we're evolving as a world and as we have younger generations coming in, um, we see that things have to change, right? Communication has to change, styles of leadership have to change. And so that's what we're really, really passionate about doing is communication and self-development and growth. And how do we take the amazing things of process improvement, strategy, and business and align those to leadership and align the person to the truest parts of the leaders that they have within themselves? So that's what we're here to talk about today. And that's one of the reasons why we've partnered with Vinay and his team. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Emily. And so I was kind of thinking about this morning too, before we got into this. And it's like, if you're thinking about leadership and you're thinking about what do we do well, I think as globally, the larger perspective, we all have this tendency to not make changes until we're forced into changes, right? Like if it's not broke, don't fix it. That's what we do oftentimes in business. And with this tool, everyone's going to be able to see like you don't have to get to that point, right? You can take these assessments and you can learn so much about yourself and your leadership style. You can learn so much about your team and where they're actually at versus what they're actually communicating to you, because we often find this is different. Um, so how leadership misalignment and what it shows you is it's slowing down your operations. And it doesn't even have to be just operations and manufacturing, right? You have 2 points here on the screen, 20% efficiency loss among leadership teams due to misalignment. So if you look at the leadership team as they're coming together, when they have misalignments just amongst the team, this is causing that 20% of efficiency loss amongst what they do and then how they're rolling things out for their team and for the company. And if you guys can hear that squeaking in the background, I apologize. That is my dog playing with her toy.
I've got one here too.
She does what she wants when she wants. We love her for it. And then you see the second point is the production delays. And so when we look at production specifically, you have delays in production, right? Just because of what production does. But then if you combine the leadership misalignment with that, then you've also got an opportunity for another 15% that you can capitalize on there. So if you look at just these two areas, you're looking at 35% already. And that's huge. Like I know most companies would take the 15% alone as a win, and the 20%, like we'll get to it when we can get to it, depending on what it is. So that's another thing that I love about this tool is the transparency and what it shows you in real time based on your answers. Because how often do you have people come up, to a company or to a process or even to people, right? And they'll say things like, oh, I see that you've got this, and this going on, right? And I can help you with this. But a lot of times, unless we're seeing it in black and white and it's our own input and our own data, then we're like, nah, I think you're wrong, right? And that's another thing that I love about this tool is because you're answering the questions, you're taking the assessment, and it's showing you based off of your own data and your information, like here are your strengths and here are your potential frictions. You can go ahead and go to the next slide. So just to look at this this graph here. I know it is a little bit hairy. To me, the first time I saw it, I was like, there's a lot going on with this thing, right? So I'll let Vinay speak to this in more detail because this is his baby and he does it so beautifully with his interpretations. But if we look at this company, CRA Automotive Manufacturing, and you can see all of the different lines, all the different colors represent the different people amongst the leadership team. And what you're seeing in gray is where the entire leadership, like this is kind of like the conglomeration, if you will, and the overlay and the overlap of where everyone's thinking that they're sitting, right? So the farther out that you go towards the outside edge, this is where your strengths are going to lie. So you can see we've got some quality control, some innovation. People are feeling really good in those areas in the company overall.
I'm
And
familiar
that
with the chart because Vinay gave us a good tour of the approach.
good. I love that. Yeah. So then you can see where all of these frictions are coming in, and there's quite a lot of frictions for this particular company. Benai, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I so something I would like to maybe just bring sort of light to is this idea that with any energy, you are either creating friction or you're creating motion, right? And what lots of times when I've worked in places before, when we bring somebody in, they're usually saying from a perspective outside, they get this objective view of what's actually happening for maybe the first month or so, and they're giving a brand new perspective. Have always wondered myself when somebody comes in, what do they really see from the outside looking in? Because I'm too close to the action. I like to think of this gray area in the middle as what that outside perspective, that outside person sees in the first month when they're coming in from the outside. And as you said, they can see scores like innovation where the black area, the black line of the gray area is much closer to the outside edge of quality control. They see that. This is what the computer is essentially telling us it sees of the culture of this organization. And once you start to see that, you get to go,
So the
huh,
gray line's the arithmetic average, right?
correct. That's right.
Yeah.
So that big, yeah, that gray area kind of builds what I'll call the shared reality in that team. I'm
Yeah.
calling that
If everyone has equal voice, right?
correct.
Human reality may be different in that you may latch on to two or three people's story and get a bit of a different one, but I get it. That's if you do a perfect synthesis of everything you heard.
Olivia, it's a fantastic point because that what I'll call the leadership or hierarchical bias is almost always there. How do you uh, kind of tease that out, right? The CEO is always going to kind of govern or strongly influence the outcome of people's inputs. This might be the first chance or opportunity to start to see what do they actually see from their perspective.
Yep.
Yeah, so when we look in terms of the misalignments that we're seeing, I think most people understand well what turnover cost does, right? Like you've got all the costs associated with onboarding, right? There's tons of onboarding costs. There's tons of training costs, especially in more developed companies that have more robust training processes. I know I've been in companies before that have 2 weeks to several months just up front, right? Getting you up to speed on the company and what they do and the processes and how they handle things and how they operate. Um, so for companies like that, like this 80K per employee is actually a very low number. And then when we look at them leaving the company, right? If they're not satisfied and
Exactly. I was going to add that the exit cost in Europe is big. So,
And
oh
and
yeah.
and it's
and
and in effect, it's a recruiting cost.
Yeah.
Yep.
And if I could actually add one more thing to it, I mean, an analogy I've made to a lot of people is you can have a 300-watt light bulb, which is quite a powerful bulb, right? Or you could have a 300-watt laser, and the 300-watt laser will burn through sheet steel. The bulb does not do that. And I think ultimately what happens is lots of organizations end up running as that light bulb as opposed to the laser. Imagine if you're able to do that laser, this turnover cost, this employees lost, right? That domain knowledge that walks out the door as soon as they walk at, as soon as they leave the organization. This ability to find out what their level of alignment and sort of focus as an individual and how that aligns with the overall organization gets you closer and closer to that laser as opposed to the 300-watt light bulb.
Yeah. And I love that point too, because I know that there have been plenty of times when we've had employees leave and you're contacting employees after they've left. Like, where is this file at? What is this, right? Like, how do I do this if you don't know? I've had this happen to myself. And I responded like, hey, I don't work for the organization anymore. Like, I'm happy to come in and consult if you'd like me to, but you knew when I was leaving. I gave you like a month's notice. Sorry, like, and that all is going to depend too on what's that relationship with the person when they left. Do they still feel like, oh yeah, I love these people, I love the company, it just didn't work out, so I'm happy to help? Or you can have people that are a little more on the disgruntled side that are like, no, you're not paying me anymore, I'm good. Like, it's your problem now, not mine, right? Then when we look at that inefficiency side, that's huge. And I know 50K per team, depending on company size, is actually an incredibly low number, but to be on the lower end, so it's equatable, I would say, to smaller companies and as well as large companies. So, and then for those of us who are in this manufacturing space and have been there, like, we all know that downtime, if you're shutting your end customer down, that's thousands of dollars per
So
hour.
is there, I'm kind of curious what if other people are kind of seeing this kind of space here. I mean, I know Ken has joined, Lokesh joined. I'd love to hear, and Olivia, I mean, I'm sure you've got plenty of stories around this as well, or sort of perspectives on this. Um, how have you all approached this before in trying to mitigate some of these, these risks here, or trying to identify them so that you can cut them off at the pass before they occur? Have you all seen it? What have you all? I mean, I'm sure you've seen it. What did you all do?
Well, I don't know. Maybe this is anticipating on the next part of the conversation around, good leadership. But obviously, that's the price you pay when if leadership can't, first of all, set the right strategy in the right course, that's going to place the company in a successful position and grow value, etc. But then their ability to communicate that and to get everyone on board, right? Um, I often refer to the triptych of head, heart, and guts, which was a book by my colleagues, like Rhinesmith and Cairo, who essentially said leadership has to be aligned between the three. And, all too often, it's not. And that's because people aren't born leaders, and good leadership, at least in my profession in strategy consulting, where I come from, is accidental. But in a lot of industries, it is as well, right? The people who get promoted in the leadership positions are not the ones they've been successful, sometimes for the wrong reasons. And if they fail to create alignment, then they're paying the cost of having part of the organization not in line with what they're trying to achieve. Um,
Yeah,
so yeah, I
Olivia,
think this is very common, right? The probability that everyone is humming, that the business is um, at,
syncopation.
at, 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 I don't know. There's an analogy with sailing. I don't know how many of you sailed, but I used to do, like small sailboats. There's one position of the boat which is absolutely ideal, where you can actually hear the boat almost vibrating. But it's pretty rare, and it's pretty rare for an organization to be at its best cruising altitude, where everything is just perfect. It may happen 2 days a year. So to me, this is reality, right? It's like that everywhere, and there's obviously a cost to it. I guess what I'm interested in it is, how do you, address it, Julie, Emily, when you face that in a manufacturing setting?
Emily, do you want to answer? You want me
Yeah,
to go?
yeah. That's where our tools that we have learned in the manufacturing space have come in handy. And so a lot of that is going back to like root cause analysis, gap analysis, but not just on the process side, but on the leadership side. So in manufacturing, they're very good at implementing those tools in the process, but not implementing it on a leadership side to understand what is the root cause here. And most of the time, it kind of goes back to the leader having the awareness of what actually is happening, what they assume is happening versus what is actually happening, which is another reason why we love this tool, because in real time, you can see what your entire leadership thinks that is happening. And then also ask, like, does that align up with what the numbers are telling us?
And Olivia, I love what you had said earlier about the head, heart, and the gut. Because for those of you who know what human design is, Emily and I are very, very big into human design. So every person, every company that we work with, we discuss what human design is and look specifically at their human design and help to guide them to be. And we were actually having a conversation with this about Benai before everyone got on. Because I'm a projector in human design, which means I don't make my own energy naturally. So working and living in this high capacity, like everything is a fire, everything is an emergency, everything is always burning down in automotive manufacturing. I would get to the weekends and I would just be like, I'd have no energy left. Like I would spend almost the entire weekend trying to recharge for the next week. And so taking these key components to the leadership team and showing them, okay, how can we realign your leadership team to fit their strengths in the best way based on their personal design and make it all come together so beautifully? Because if we just look at Emily and I as well in company, like she's a manifester, I'm a projector. We are so different on so many things. And one of our biggest opportunities for growth has been communication, which I know a lot of people say this, right? But think if you've got a leadership team of 5, 6, 7, maybe 10 people, and you've got all these different people, if they don't understand what their design type is and what their communication style is, like it's so much deeper than just leadership. And I think that the more we get into this like heart, head, gut alignment that Olivier was talking about, the better chance and better opportunity a company has of being successful and of, righting the ship and getting back to that, like, we're in this
Could
perfect
could I
alignment
offer
that
a
we.
could I offer sort of maybe a picture to kind of tie all those things together? I've taken lots of personality tests, lots of personality inventories, and they all tell you sort of something. And what they've done for me is give me sort of definition, at least counterpoint, mirror, if you will, as to who I am, what I'm good at, what are my sort of natural proclivities and natural frictions, right? But what it doesn't tell me, so if you will, that tells me sort of what I look like as a puzzle piece, but it doesn't tell me where I fit into the puzzle. And I think that's the opportunity here is that we can see that from on screen here, there are significant costs to not figuring out where the puzzle pieces fit into the puzzle. So you can understand, so lots of organizations have done the personality inventories, whatever ilk that is, right? But if you can kind of see where that puzzle piece fits into the puzzle so that it's fitting, slotting in perfectly with everyone else, I think that's where the magic comes into play.
Can I add something to that, Vinay? Because I spent a year in our leadership development business trying to help um, leaders and their teams enhance their effectiveness. And we use a lot of assessments, FIRO-B, MBTI-2, Hogan derailers, etc. And what I found to be most, I mean, it can help if you're doing a casting, you're trying to find, the best combination of people, but you don't get to do that every day, and you can't, your team has to evolve. It evolves slowly over time. But what I found these assessments very powerful is if you can get people to share, to open up, to reach a certain level of, let's call it emotional intelligence, where they're ready to disclose what their derailers are, um, and what makes them tick or what puts them off, then you create much greater understanding of your colleagues, and you have a much greater ability to overcome annoyance from, how another person operates, which is very different from how you operate, or you learn how to, give them the kinds of things that they need. A detail-oriented person, you can't just go, with some great poem and tell them how you're going to move forward. So you learn to adapt. But to me, the most, and this is an interesting, I don't know how we take your tool, and I to, make it part of and enable conversations. I think that's and enable opening up, because I think that's where it begins. And we all have limits, whether they're competency limits or or behavioral limits, right? Um, and either you spend a long time trying to figure them out, or you have people that are more open about them, and you can move forward faster.
Agreed. I was smiling a little bit as you were sharing all this stuff because current administration in my household has told me that this is fantastic as long as you do this as a business, but don't ever try to run it on me and try to figure me out because I will be angry.
Although these tools are used in family counseling or
Yeah, that's
marriage
right.
counseling,
Yeah,
just
that's right.
as much as they're used in business, right? Um, and I find them very, very enlightening. And I would facilitate week-long programs, where people would go through individual coaching, understanding of their own assessments, and then have the conversations. And ultimately, at the end of the week, hopefully the whole team got a chance to, you know, deepen their understanding and overcome some real obstacles and just talk to one another. Um, because it brings back another thought when I look at your chart, particularly the colorful spaghetti one. Um, we had one thing called round robin sessions where round robin was, I think in the old days, women would needle point something, and for some reason it was more efficient to make it in circle. They would do each a part and pass it around. Maybe it's Taylorism in the 12th century, but anyway, the point of a round robin session is that you get everyone to talk. You have 10 minutes with a timer to talk with everyone else on the team. And the reason it's important is, the production people don't necessarily talk to the finance people. There are natural innovation and marketing might talk or should talk, but as innovation and finance talk, probably not. And yet they sit around the same executive leadership table, and they would probably have a few good pointers for that other person, right? And so gaining a better understanding from people who observe you, who work with you, but who don't have a natural overlap or a natural interface with you, is also extraordinarily valuable. And Vinay, that may be also something to highlight in your in the especially in the spaghetti bowl when you see very different readouts of and it reveals a very different perception of what the situation is. And it may be if it's from two respondents that are in areas that wouldn't necessarily interface much, um, maybe your tool could point out the needs for some of those. Let's say you have a diverging score or more diverging than other scores from fellow reporters in three or more categories, then it's time to have, a conversation.
Yeah.
And it echoes of, sorry, I'll give you a practical experience. When I worked on the Air France transformation plan, um, for the incoming CEO who needed to get something launched, I created an effective round robin thing where I created this huge chart with all the different departments. It was a table where you had the same departments listed on both sides, and we had some where they clearly had to work together because there were clear interfaces on certain things that needed fixing, but we had a gradation on the level of response. It went from glued to the hip to let's have lunch every 6 months. Um, but it was always about having some form of what is the nature of our interaction and how do we make sure we stay in touch, even if we're on the let's have a lunch every 6 months end of the specter.
And Julie, that might be a fantastic lead in to kind of think where you're going to go with this is, people could take that one of two ways, right? Kind of sitting on different ends and having perspectives of each other. Some people could take it as a very attacking sort of motion, sort of an offensive sort of motion. That is very much possible and does happen. Or they could take it, and it depends very much on the culture, or they could take it as a constructive amplifier, multiplier opportunity, which Julia, I suspect you're going to talk about a slide, which kind of gives you that opportunity. But here, T-ball.
Yeah. So, and those are all great points, Olivier, for sure. Because of all of these different dynamics, right? And the team, and we often see people working in silos. So this is the perfect opportunity for us to see like, what does our silo look like for us? And then how does it look in comparison to the group as a whole? So that's again one of the reasons why we love this tool is because you can understand your leadership very deeply in roughly 3 minutes, right? Like whatever your personal style is. And we know, like you said earlier, you're changing, you're constantly changing and evolving. The team is constantly changing and evolving. So when you're taking this tool and this assessment, it's going to be different throughout the year. And that's another thing that we love is you have the opportunity to take it up to 5 times in 1 year. So then you can also track the progress towards your goals and track, the training that you're doing or the different KPIs that you have, like how is the team converging to move the ship forward and where are we seeing some breakdowns? It's like Emily said before, that the fact that it gives you this real-time data is just incredible. Vinay, was there anything else?
Well, actually earlier today I went to a networking event, which is around private equity and investment banking. And the biggest challenge for investment banking, private equity, is deal flow. They're always trying to find more deals, and the biggest challenge is in their pre-diligence, due diligence stages, is trying to understand a little more of the culture because everything may look fantastic on a spreadsheet, and that's often the rough and only tool that they have to evaluate an organization. But if they can see something like on screen here, the blue being one member of the team and the gray being the rest of the team, they could see that potentially as, oh my gosh, there's no alignment here. The numbers look fantastic. These people are not on the same page. Or depending on the culture of the organization, they could say, oh, if that blue is the CEO or the leader of the organization, the gray is everybody else. Wow, the CEO has put people in and around them that actually augments their natural strengths. Gosh, this is a force. Putting capital into this company or acquiring this company is an opportunity to scale. Um, Olivier, it sounds like you had a thought on that, or
Private equity's ability to even be aware of culture or to read it is limited. If anything, because it's an industry that has a lot of young people in it, and nothing wrong with young people. I used to work with them and loved working with them. But only seasoned CEOs who've been burnt so many times are going to be aware of the importance of culture. And I think, Vinay, I mentioned in an earlier conversation when I ran strategy for the post office in France, I witnessed an acquisition that they had just made, and they misread um, the culture of two entrepreneurially charged up companies that they brought together and put a very competent postal leader in lieu of the two founders that had left, and they wiped out the value of their acquisition within weeks, right? And so had they done the due diligence and in a way where they would have been looked at more than the numbers and checking customers and whatever they do in the due diligence and had paid attention to culture and leadership, they would have done much better, right? Or they wouldn't maybe or they wouldn't have acquired it because they would have realized that it was, no matter how good they were at managing those kinds of companies, that these two were not the ones to bring together, not to acquire and not to bring together. So, incredibly aware and then there are countless examples of that. I think the question is how do we, how do you get the message out? How do you get how do you make the tool work in the manufacturing world and in other worlds? You know, Ken, who's looking after his flat tire there, has applied, this in the police world. There's lots of opportunities, and I think here we have to all figure out how it is we leverage it.
excuse me.
Mhm.
Yeah, so I think from the tool perspective, I think that this is for me personally, right? You can use it in any industry, which I love because it's not industry specific. And I think that's fantastic because at the end of the day, every industry has people and you can't run without people. So that's one thing that I'm incredibly excited about with this, because you get to see the different moldings, and you get to see, like you were saying, Olivier, like it looks great on paper on a spreadsheet, right? And it looks great, but then once in actuality, it doesn't turn out that way. And so you can, and think about this from a hiring perspective. I just saw on LinkedIn the other day, someone who took a job that they were, I don't know that they were relatively excited about it, but it had a very nice salary with it. It was like 360K a year. And so they took it because of that. And the culture was toxic. So they made it just a couple of weeks. And then they were back in the marketplace again looking for another job. And having tools like this, like you're gonna already be able to tell where your workforce is at, where your team is at. So as you're bringing, and if you've got high turnover, which we do see a lot, what's the reason for it, right? It's because the person isn't a good fit for the culture, or the culture is not a good fit for the person. And what's going to continue to happen with that. And so if we're looking at this slide right here, you see the green outline is the leadership team, and then the blue outline is like the organization as a whole, and then the red is where we're combining the two together. So you can see where we need more help and more support, and where we don't.
But here's a question for you and for Vinay. How do you get people to separate in their mind a rating of importance versus performance? So take the innovation team is going to could say, hey, we're great at innovation, whether they are or not. Um, or innovation is what matters most. And they have a blind spot. If you're in operation, let's imagine the green shape was filled by people in R&D, and the
Okay.
blue shape was filled by people on the shop floor. You know, the people on the shop floor view the world as all that matters is the operational efficiency, and people in R&D just worry about the future and making sure they have an innovative product. And this reflects more, it's back to a conversation we had, Vinay, on their biases or their lens. It's not to say that, for all we know, um, the blue people, the manufacturing people may think innovation is wonderful, and so it's not an issue. And the importance of what we should emphasize is should all be about, putting all our efforts on improving production. So, and maybe it's all about the setup of the questionnaire and how you put people in situation to make sure that they respond about what they think is the level of performance, or how well they versus how important it is to be successful in there. And when you do, and the risk of the 15-minute thing is that it's you only get one shot versus, say, for example, some more comprehensive assessments on culture or FIROB or whatever, where there's you spend 20 minutes answering lots and lots of questions. Some of them overlap, and part of which gives you some safety in understanding, in really getting inside people's brains.
So I
Julie, you
think
want to
that,
try that? Go ahead.
yeah, one of the things I would say, I think with this tool, it gives you clearly from all the way down. You can start at an entry level all the way down to your executive team, right? So you can see that whole screenshot, that whole snapshot of the entire organization. So we're saying, like, how do those results will drive what your actions are going to be able to close those gaps. So for example, if production doesn't see the importance of innovation, that's going to show up in this report. And that's kind of where we come in as a company and be like, okay, now let's close that gap. And here's the action plan to close that gap. And a lot of that goes back to what KPIs do you have set for your organization, and are you enforcing them? And does all the teams understand the mission and the value? Because you can soon start to see when they take this test through this tool, what the trends are. You're going to start to be able to identify those, and then you take your top 3 to 5 and work from there. I don't know,
Okay.
Julie,
And I think,
have any
and I think
thoughts?
also from the bias standpoint, I want to see the bias. I want to see where that bias is, because this also is going to show us, like, where's the breakdown in the communication. Because I can share stories upon stories upon stories of arguments I've had with innovation R&D, right? They're trying to bring something new in, or they're trying to switch a product, and they have no idea what's happening on the production floor. Where if we could have had a different scope and a different vantage point, from production's vantage point, we're like, I have trucks to make. I don't care what you're trying to run right now. Like, you need to work around my schedule. But to your point, if we aren't innovative, we aren't going to survive. So then we can see all of these gaps and say, okay, we come and we sit at the same table and we talk about how I don't want to say like how we protect what we each do, but it is kind of that, right? How do we protect what we do, but how do we see each other and work together?
So if I connect that to my emotional intelligence point earlier, these are conversation starters.
Yes. Yes.
Full
So
stop.
the language I would use is there are two different types of data that I've seen. There's qualitative data and then there's quantitative data, right? Oftentimes people try to make, at least in my experience, a lot of people have tried to make qualitative decisions based on quantitative data. They take a look at a spreadsheet and say, I know what's happening in my organization. You understand one half of the organization. If you don't understand why people are doing things, why, what, and how, right? Simon Sinek says start with how. And the other side, Peter Drucker says, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. People try to improve it by understanding how to do things, but they don't understand why that's occurring in the first place, right? There's a systemic issue. The reason my back is hurting is because I sit in a chair all day and my quadriceps are getting absolutely no strength whatsoever because I've been sitting there for 8 hours a day for the last 3 years. We're not diagnosing that issue. We're just taking pills for back pain. And that's what people end up doing. So I think this gives us the ability to kind of pull back on that thread that started upstream and start to understand what that is. So that directionally we're asking the right questions, where we can now start to put the KPIs in place that actually start to point and ultimately will solve those symptoms. So the word a chiropractor gave to me, or a phrase a chiropractor gave to me, the way he explained to me, he says, Vinay, what does it take to pick up a baby off the floor? Like, I don't know, you bend down. He said, no, hold on a second. You've got to prepare the muscles in your foot to, to tense first, so that your calf and your lower leg can tense, so that your upper leg, so that your hips, all the way up to your shoulders. And he said, if your shoulders start to fire as a muscle before you tense the arch of your foot, you're going to just fall over because you don't have the proper base. A lot of people start to think about, how do I make sure my shoulders and my arms are strong, when in fact you don't even have the base and foundation for that to do it. I think a lot of people are starting to focus on that tail end as opposed to the kinetic chain that leads to that. And I think that's what this does. It starts to tell us where that kinetic chain starts. Is that resonating?
Yeah, I'm not sure I see the feet versus shoulder thing in the chart here, but I get your point.
Okay. Yeah. The goal is that this is directional in nature. It's not deterministic, right? It tells you where to start asking questions. And as we start to see them, we start to say, well, why does this gap exist? Let's start to put metrics or KPIs that are specific to that fingerprint of that culture to start to close that gap. Now we can put practices, deterministic measures, and KPIs that are bespoke to that situation or custom to that situation.
And also in a more efficient way, because if you've ever worked in manufacturing and they brought someone in to do interviews, it takes hours upon hours to interview all the leadership team, to interview those on production, and you might get some great results. And then by the time they compile that, you're like a quarter in before you start to see your results, which is another reason why it's great to have a tool like this where you can run it every quarter and see those results, and you don't have to spend all this time.
I also look at it from a wrangling perspective. I was a training manager for years and years and years. So getting someone to take an in-depth anything, right? Whether it's a training or an assessment, it was like pulling, it's like tooth and nail, right? Every single time. But if I say, listen, I need 3 minutes of your time. 3 minutes, that's it? Yeah, I just need 3 minutes. You can do 3 minutes, right? And they're like, oh yeah, I can do 3 minutes, no big deal. The last training you wanted me to do was like 3 days. So 3 minutes is fine, right? So from that perspective too, it's that time management, and how do we afford them so much data in such a little time? And that's what I think is phenomenal from this perspective. and from this tool.
One of the things is, and you saw on all of those visuals there, right? There's multiple axes, right? So think of that as something that can actually scale up and down as well, right? So we've got organizations we work with where they've got employee engagement surveys, employee net promoter scores. They've got KPIs for their performance in their role, their salaries, their compensation structures, their attendance policies. These are all different things. When you start to put those together with just these simple perceptions issues, what is their alignment on a scale of 1 to 10 with the overall organization, right? And you start to put payroll, you start to put attendance policy, performance in their role, longevity with the company, their seniority in their role. You start to take a look at those things. You can scale this up and down in terms of seeing what at different levels of scope, what is their level of engagement? It starts to become really, really deep and complex, just like most humans are, right? So you get to see them not only from an emotional point of view, but also from a behavioral point of view. What behaviors have they been exhibiting? And if you start to see their visual, how they align with the team, you go, oh, that's why they're doing that. And it becomes crystal clear in a couple of seconds. So as we get more from the qualitative to the quantitative, it starts to tell even more of the story as to why that those behaviors occur.
I'm just thinking of the so many regular temperature check surveys that we would have in my previous corporate world, and how seldom I saw anything come back out of it. Um, and so, chances are there are already lots of instruments out there
Yes.
that are available, which won't necessarily be in this format. So I'm not sure that we can, how you throw it
So
into the pot.
so we've gone to organizations where we've had 11 different systems that will bring in will normalize all the data. I mean, that's sort of the business intelligence side of that. But I mean, that's easy peasy for us. We do that in our sleep. We'll bring all those assessments they have, bring that all together. So now you see an overall qualitative, holistic picture of what is happening. Why does customer conversations have people walking out the door? You can start to make those correlations, and you can do correlation analysis between that. We've done that for companies where you now start with this diagnostic as a place to start asking questions. Then you start to pull in data from various sources, and all of a sudden to say, I never even knew to ask that question. That's what this is the beginning journey of. Yeah, they already have a lot of it already. They just don't know how to pull it all together.
And then when they do pull it together, like he mentioned, what are you going to do with it? What's the plan after that?
And let me throw out a stat for a company. They started with sort of the emotional side. 3 months later, their operations team saw a 29% jump in productivity and profitability, which in 29% in 3 months, I mean, 5% in 3 months is usually a big jump. They saw 29%, but I don't think that was the win. The win was the 40% increase in employee engagement. Employees were talking to each other. They're starting to talk to supervisors over the course of the next 6 months. The amount of time, I think the Harvard Business Review stat I saw was that the average manager or leader spends 20 hours a week just compiling data, massaging it, looking at the spreadsheets, visualizing it, talking to people. This company 6 months later said that the average supervisor was spending 2 hours a week on all of that, because now they're spending those extra 17, 18 hours a week talking with their people. So it just becomes this sort of vicious cycle where everybody lifts, right?
Virtuous cycle. Yeah.
Fun
Can
stuff.
you emerge from the garage?
Yeah, they're putting tire on the car. Sorry, I'm not in the best position to do this, but I really have just one question because I know I missed this first 15 minutes, but knowing a little bit about the tool and wanted to meet you all a little more. Hopefully we can do that better next time if I'm not in this situation. But if you think about manufacturing, I have a lot of manufacturing clients as well. Using this tool, what do you think is unique in this? Is there a formulation that is uniquely applicable to manufacturing as you're discussing this now? Is that part of what you're trying to see, is like which are the elements that are more pertinent for manufacturing as opposed to other types of organizations like IT or services, or has that been part of the conversation? Like innovation obviously is for manufacturing, customer relations are very important, obviously, but so that's what I'm wondering.
Yeah,
Julie, Emily, I'll let you all feel that. Yeah.
yeah, I think we had mentioned this. I think Julie had mentioned it before, where this tool is basically you can take it in any industry. And the manufacturing side, I think it's going to be very crucial to see how the leadership team is all on the same page, because like we discussed, there you have like the innovation, you have the R&D, you have the procurement, everybody kind of working in their silos. And then when they can have that, when the plant manager can have like that awareness of, oh, this is why, everybody's working in silos and we're not getting our results, or we're not hitting our plant targets. Julie can speak to the plant targets points, and how a lot of times those targets don't get hit because one department is working in silos.
That's actually all departments are typically working in silos, right? And from the plant perspective, like the plant sees this, right? But this tool helps to ask the right questions then to see where the gaps are, so then you can start to ask these questions, right? You can start to bring the people to the same table, because I mean, when you're in production, like you don't care what anyone, finance, you care if finance is giving you the money you need for your equipment, right? You care that the R&D and innovations they're helping you to move forward, but they're not hindering your production based on their wants and their needs, and they're working around your time scale, right? But so many times all of these things can be solved with simple conversations. And these people are often sitting in the same room multiple times a week, right? But we're still not communicating, and the reason behind that is because they don't care, but they're not asking the right questions. Whereas you see these graphs and you see the data that it presents, and then you can start to ask these questions like, okay, R&D, I understand why you think innovation is so hot and so great, but from a production standpoint I would disagree, and here's why. But how can we bridge that gap?